Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this most engaging of events at the Oxford Union. In association with the Oxford University Islamic Society, we are welcoming Professor Tariq Ramadan and Meriem Namazi to debate the key issues facing Islam in Europe today. Professor Tariq Ramadan is a professor of contemporary Islamic studies in Oxford, having formerly held positions in universities across the world. He is a persona non grata in at least 6 countries, including Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and his challenges to, for his challenges to undemocratic regimes. Meriem Namazi is a spokesperson for the Council of Ex-Muslims and for Iranian Solidarity. Her writing specializes in challenging cultural relativism and political Islam, which has had multiple lectures no-platformed and disrupted as a result of her views. Thank you to both our speakers for joining us here today. You are most welcome. In terms of the format of the debate, the evening will run as follows. Each speaker will have 6 minutes to respond to the first 2 questions, which I will ask, and 8 minutes to respond to the third question, again, which I will ask. I will then open up the floor to the debate. Questions from the floor must be addressed to both speakers, and the speaker will have no more than 2 minutes to answer. I will ding the bell when the speaker has 1 minute left for any response or statement. With that, I'll move to my first question. Was the Shárli Hebdo cartoon of Muhammad Islamophobic? Professor Ramadan.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Because we don't have much time, let me go straight to the point. I think that when it comes to Islamophobia, we have to be quite clear about the definition, because not everything is about Islamophobia. And I think that this is a term which is sometimes misused. When there is a critical take on an Islamic or a religious principle, when it's criticizing the behavior of Muslims or what they are thinking, this is not Islamophobia. Islamophobia is a type of racism against Muslims when we are targeting Muslims because they are Muslims, whatever they think and whatever they do. And when it comes to Shárli Hebdo and the way they were treating Islam, it's quite clear that we have to look at what was done within a specific atmosphere in the French society. 75% of the people in France, when it comes to the survey, are thinking that Islam, the perception of Islam is negative. So Islam is a problem per se. It has to do with violence. It has to do with discrimination of women. So we are not dealing in a void. We are dealing within an atmosphere, and the way they were treating Islam was quite specific. Yes, it's true that Shárli Hebdo was targeting Christianity, much less than Islam. They were targeting some other religious principles of other religion, but in fact the way they were treating Islam and the way they were treating it within the atmosphere in France was nurturing a clear type of racism. So yes, at the end, if you look at the atmosphere, if you look at the context, it's quite clear that they were nurturing and targeting Islam, not only because they were targeting terrorism or some of the attitudes of Muslims, but it was very much about the very essence of Islam and making it, being a Muslim in France was a problem and nurturing a sense of alienation in the whole discussion. So this is one thing which is important. The second is that I was challenging them in the way they were treating, and I said to the Muslims, because I also have a problem with Islamophobia when Islamophobia is nurturing with Muslims a victim mentality. It's just to be on the defensive, so this is why I was saying you take a critical distance with this, you don't react to that. It's exactly what they want. They are provoking a reaction and they want Muslims to react in such a way. But at the same time, I was challenging the people of Shárli Hebdo by saying, what you are doing with Islam, targeting this population and targeting the people who are marginalized into the society and creating an Islamic problem within the society, this is in fact a way of creating a type, you are nurturing racism, even though per se the caricature or the cartoons are not Islamophobic. Within this atmosphere, this is exactly what you are doing. So this is your responsibility. This is what I was telling them, and I think it's problematic. Add to this, which is important in the whole discussion, is the double standard. Because the way they were dealing with Islam, you had exactly the same Charlie Hebdo. When Cine, who was working with Charlie Hebdo, did something about the son of Sarkozy and mentioning the fact that he was a Jewish son who will succeed because he is a Jewish son, within 2 weeks he was fired. So how come when it comes to Islam, you can say whatever you want in the name of freedom of expression, and when it comes to a specific discussion about the Jewish tradition, you can't do this? And when I was saying, how come you fire this one and you are nurturing and promoting that one? They say, not in the name of freedom of expression, not everything can be said. So when it's about Islam, you can say whatever you want. Why is this important? Because you cannot just extract this without looking at the whole atmosphere in France with this perception that Islam is a problem, Muslims cannot integrate, and you are targeting the Islamic values by saying they are problematic per se. So as the Islamic values are problematic per se, it means that Muslims are a problem within the French society, and then this is racist. So at the end, looking at the whole picture, yes, this is a kind of Islamophobia to which we have to respond by saying, that's fine. Freedom of expression is freedom of expression. We have to promote it, we have to protect it. This is what I said from the very beginning, but with a consistent take on everything. If you are for freedom of expression here, you have to be for freedom of expression there, for all the citizens exactly the same way, and then you also have to take into account so this is 1 minute? Okay, you have to take into account the atmosphere that is within the society. A last point here, which is also important, is the way the people from within Charlie Hebdo were dealing with the issue. It's as if, in fact, they knew that by provoking the reactions, they were having this kind of exposure within the society. And I was telling them, if you are serious about freedom of expression and not only provoking and making money of the whole process, because you also have a book was written about what is behind the scene, in which way everything which was done was creating this kind of controversy, and they were making money out of it. And I told them, if you are serious about this, take all the money that you are getting and give this money to African countries just to show that you are serious about the principles and not using the controversy to get more exposure, because you know that Islam is making money. So yes, they were Islamophobic because of the environment and because of the way they were dealing with it.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Ramadan. Meriem Namazi, was the Charlie Hebdo cartoon Muhammad Islamophobic?
Thank you very much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be standing here. I think that criticism of religion, however offensive, isn't racism against believers. I think there is a misconception about this term. If we're talking about racism against Muslims, then I accept that we should use a term Muslim phobia or bigotry against Muslims. When it comes to Islamophobia, I have a huge problem with this term because I feel that it is used in order to defend and protect criticism against Islam. And I think what it is doing is conflating blasphemy with bigotry in order to impose Islamist norms on the wider society. Charlie Hebdo's cartoons of Muhammad, Islam's prophet, are no more bigotry against Muslims than its covers poking fun against Christian or Jewish gods, prophets, rabbis, clerics are bigotry against Christians and Jews. In Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in the Islamic State, critics of religion are often faced with accusations of blasphemy and apostasy for very similar things. Here in Europe, they are accused of Islamophobia. Accusations of Islamophobia, in my opinion, are used to scaremonger people into silence rather than out of a concern for minorities, as if minorities, like myself, do not have the right to criticize religion and Islamism, which is the religious right wing. In fact, someone like myself, an atheist of Muslim heritage, is a minority within a minority and needs the right and possibility to be able to criticize Islam without accusations of Islamophobia. Essentializing and homogenizing Muslims and equating them with Islamists, which I think is what this term actually does, reduces masses of people to fanatics who are more concerned with cartoons than with murder. It's like equating Christians with the KKK or with Pegida. Calling Charlie Islamophobic, in my opinion, sees dissent and blasphemy through Islamist eyes, an offense that must either be censored or punished by death, whether it's by Sharia law in countries ruled by Sharia or via the Kalashnikov if it is here in the West. Charlie Hebdo belongs to an anti-clerical and satirical tradition that is not the sole domain of the West. For example, we have the Azerbaijani weekly magazine Mullah Nasreddin, which was founded in 1906, which similarly poked fun at Islam. Muhammad was also depicted in the weekly, and mullahs in Persia at the time, it's called Iran today, issued a fatwa calling for the death of its editor, Mirza Jalil. You've got many examples of this nature. The deeply anti-religious writer Sadiq Hidayat, who died in 1951, he's another example where he said heaven is the best excuse to make this world into a hell. The conflation of entire communities and societies with Islamism refuses to acknowledge that there are many within those who are considered Muslims, which, by the way, include reformers, include secularists, including believing secularists, as well as ex-Muslims and atheists, and feminists, socialists, and so on and so forth, who also want to and need to criticize Islam and Islamism, often at great risk to their lives. People like Raif Badawi, who has been sentenced to 10 years in prison and 1,000 lashes merely for raising the question of religion and politics. Bangladeshi bloggers like Avijit Roy, who was hacked to death for his books on science and religion. Hesameddin Farzizadeh, a 23-year-old writer and student in Iran, who's been sentenced to death for a book examining the history and questioning facets of Shia Islam. Abdulaziz Douada, an Islamic scholar who has been sentenced to death in Nigeria for a lecture which was deemed blasphemous against Islam's prophet, and on. Saying Charlie is Islamophobic is as absurd as saying Raif Badawi or Fatima Naout, now given 3 years imprisonment in Egypt for insulting Islam because she criticized Islamic animal slaughters. It actually means that these people are also bigots, which is absurd. Algerian sociologist Meriem Lucas says this distorting Eurocentric vision sees Muslims only as victims and oppressed minorities, whereas just crossing a few borders could allow one to appreciate the Islamist nature and political program, whether it regards women's rights, whether it regards blasphemy laws or free thought. As Women Living Under Muslim Law says, this movement's main target is the internal democratic opposition to their theocratic project and to their project of controlling all aspects of society in the name of religion, including education, the legal system, youth services. When they come to power, they silence people, including cartoonists. What is really being said when Charlie is accused of Islamophobia is that criticism of Islam and Islamism are forbidden, blasphemy laws are required to protect Muslims, or rather Islamist sensibilities, and that therefore threats and actual murders of critics is perfectly legitimate, whether in Paris or beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We now turn to our second question, which is, has your opinion of saying Je suis Charlie changed over the past year? Meriem, you have 6 minutes.
Okay. I was Charlie 6 years ago. Today, Je suis Charlie, and I will always be Charlie. Here's my badge saying so. Saying one is Charlie has never meant approving everything that has been said and done by Charlie, though I must admit that I do approve of much of its left-wing, anti-racist and anti-clerical satire. I think poking fun at religion and blasphemy in the age of ISIS, when one can be killed for it, is a historical task and necessity. This is one of the main reasons why I founded something like the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, to break the taboo that comes with questioning and leaving Islam, and to challenge Islamists who strive to deny us the right to think and speak freely, including in secular societies. You don't have to like Charlie or any acts of blasphemy to defend the right to blaspheme and free expression. That is what, in my opinion, Je suis Charlie means. Think about it for a moment. Charlie cartoonists were killed in broad daylight, in cold blood, merely for their cartoons. Those who refused to stand with them imply that they got what they deserved. They should not have been killed, but what did they expect? This culture of offense and accusations of Islamophobia are smokescreens. They serve to legitimize Islamist terror and violence and to blame the victims. Islamism's a far-right political movement that has murdered innumerable Charlie Hebdos over several decades across the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia, including many Muslims who have dared to speak or mock or just live 21st century lives prohibited by the brothers. Being a woman, being a free thinker, being gay, being unveiled, improperly veiled, being an atheist, going to school, laughing out loud, driving a car, having sex that is not religiously prescribed, falling in love, dancing, all of these offend them. And violence to all this is their usual response. Calling for civility, censorship, silence, or respect for the offended is merely heeding the Islamist demand for blasphemy laws at the expense of dissenters. So yes, I am Charlie, and I am also the many Muslims, ex-Muslims and none, who criticize and question Islam day in and day out, and criticize Islamism day in and day out across the globe at great risk to themselves. Mr. Ramadan says he is not Charlie or Paris. Instead, he says he is those who are under investigation. That I show solidarity with the cartoonists murdered for blasphemy, and that he shows solidarity with those under investigation is telling enough. As Algerian sociologist Meriem Helaloukas says, in all of this, terror itself has been disappeared from the discourse. It loses reality. It becomes just an illusion. It's conjured away, and all that we are left with is blaming the victims. The refusal to be intimidated is the greatest challenge faced by today's generations. A generation which is global, hyper-connected, confronted by instantaneous and worldwide exchanges of ideas between internet users of different religions and temporalities, says writer Caroline Forrest. The rules we are at present putting in place will determine whether we live in a world of violence and terror or a world of emancipation. It must be clear to all the yes buts will lead to a society where religion will once more be taboo, where believers will be more privileged than non-believers, where majority religions will take precedence over minority ones, and where intimidation and violence will have won. The group that says, I don't agree, but I shall fight for your right to say it, will, however, create a world where people are able to engage in dialogue despite their disagreements, where believers and non-believers are equal, where all religions are considered equal, where we can laugh at our fears and stand united against those who promote violence. There is no other alternative. We either stand firm or back down. Those who think that by backing down they will avoid war are making a serious mistake. The war has already begun, decades of war against our free thinkers in the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia. Only courage will restore peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to reiterate the question, has your opinion of saying Je suis Charlie changed over the past year, Professor Ramadan?
Thank you. Look, I have been listening to the two talks, and I have a problem, because there is a great deal of emotional statements and confusion. Confusion because you are talking about what is happening in Muslim majority countries, you come back to the reality here, and at the end all this is putting you, quite paradoxically, in the state of the victims. So you are talking about the victim mentality, but all what you are saying is that we are the victims of those Muslims and And by the way, we don't know when you talk about Muslims and Islamists and extremists. So at the end, they are all the same, apparently. And confusion is not helping. And the emotional take is not helping as well. And I think that when you are talking about Muslims playing the victims, you might ask yourself if you are not playing the victims in the whole way you are putting the question. Now, about the Je suis Shārli. Straight after what happened, I was asked in Switzerland, are you Shārli? I said, no, I'm not. I'm not Shārli, and then I explained my position. And please, don't reduce what I said with the way you put it right now. Because the starting point of critical debate is accurate quotations. And what I said is, if you mean by Shārli that we have to promote freedom of expression and the right to say whatever you want to say, I said it much before in the 90s and even when the cartoon controversy started in Denmark. Say, take a critical distance, say whatever you want to say, I'm not going to react, I don't react to provocations, and I don't like what you are saying, but you are free to say it. So if you mean by this being Shārli, that's fine. But if you mean by being Shārli that I'm supporting this kind of silly sense of humor, targeting the people, I'm not Shārli, and this is my right. So if you are putting me in a situation that I don't have the right to say, that's a sense of humor that I don't like, in fact, you are taking my freedom of expression by saying you have to be for Shārli, or you are an Islamist, a radical, and you are putting yourself now in the situation of being the victims. So it's the other way around. At the end, you are the victims and I am the aggressor. And at the end, all this was instrumentalized by the French government and many, many leaders around the world. Are you Shārli with Bongo? Are you Shārli with Netanyahu, who are leading the demonstration in Paris? I'm not with these people, and I don't want any kind of instrumentalizing the emotional politics that happened just after this. I prefer to be clear on a rational, reasonable statement saying, Shārli for freedom of expression? Yes. Shārli to target and stigmatize people? Never. And then, when I was asked, are you Paris? What I said is not only I'm not Paris. I said, I'm Paris if you, with me, you add, I'm Beirut, I'm Ouagadougou, I'm Baghdad, I'm Damascus, and I'm Gaza. If you say with me, you are all this, let's go, I'm Paris. But if it's Paris and nothing else, no, I'm not Paris. Is it clear? That's my position. Because I think that the problem that we have with your positioning very often is that you are reducing the statements and the vision of the other by saying they are all the same. This is what they are saying. We are not as simplistic as that. It's a bit more complex than being on one side. And I never said yes, but I'm always saying yes, and. And you have to come to the complexity of the issue by saying, look, I'm not going to support these people, and when I said to the coward sense of humor that these people had, because targeting the marginalized community in France and saying this is what Islam is all about. No, by the way, I never, and I would never say that you are Islamophobic. You have the right to criticize Islam and some of the Islamic principles. Go ahead, do the job, do what you want to do, but don't reduce your position to something which is targeting the Muslims and doing what they were doing and the way they were doing it. Now, by saying this, it's also something that I wanted to add here. Beyond the emotional politics and beyond the instrumentalization, I'm sorry to see that you are nurturing this and helping. And helping in a way which is, for me, very, very dangerous. You are not helping critical debate. You are exactly on the same way using the emotional politics to nurture a sense that we cannot have a critical debate with Muslims, because if they start taking a stand on some of these issues, it means that implicitly they are narrow-minded, they are Islamists, and they are radicals. That's not helping the debate. You are not helping the debate. And I would rather suggest that we come to something which is what we need to do. I'm talking to Muslims around the world by pushing them to say, we need a critical thinking. And if you criticize Islamic principles, I will never, never reduce this to Islamophobia. But I don't want, we take a stand, to have people, every time we say we don't like it, it means because you don't like it, you have a hidden agenda or an Islamist understanding. I think that this kind of binary vision is the starting point of dogmatic mind. And you know what? You know what is dangerous? You can be an ex-Muslim and having a dogmatic mind. It could happen. Thank you.
Thank you for your responses to that question. We now move to the final question from me, which ties in quite nicely to what you were saying. What are the rights and responsibilities of free speech? Free speech.
It's me now.
This is you, yes.
Yeah. Okay, look. Once again, I don't want to repeat what I said, but still I have to start with this. The starting point, and I would say, because you were speaking about Muslim majority countries and the West. My take on what is happening in the West as well as what is happening in Muslim majority countries is that we need to be clear. Freedom of expression should be protected in Muslim majority countries as well as in the West. For me, there is no double standard. So if you are, and for example, I don't agree with anything which has to do with apostasy or blasphemy. When I was asked by the ISISCO and the International Islamic Conference to promote laws for blasphemy in the West, I say no, that's not the right way. It's not going to solve the problem. It's not by adding law and preventing people from speaking that we will solve the problem. So freedom of expression should be protected here, and all the situations you mentioned, I think that Muslims should be quite clear. We have to be critical with dictatorships. We have to be critical with Muslim majority countries by saying what is happening in Pakistan, what is happening in Saudi Arabia or in Qatar. I took a position which was very clear on the poet who was jailed because he was criticizing the government. I think we have to be clear on this. Freedom of expression is a right. It should be a constitutional right, and we have to protect this in Muslim majority countries as well as in the West. And for the Muslims, and especially in the West, they have, this is what the way I was putting it, and I started talking about this in Denmark when I was there 1 week after the cartoon controversy started. I said to the Muslim, this is my sentence, the phrase I put it, take an intellectual critical distance. Don't react to this, just say you don't like it, but this is part of the debate in France or in Denmark or in Europe. To the point that what we have to acknowledge is that in France, as well as in Denmark, and then in the Netherlands, and even here in this country, in the UK, the Muslims, when they are dealing with criticism, their reaction is in majority quite reasonable. They are not today. It's not the same as when it happened with Salman Rushdie. And by the way, my position in Salman Rushdie was to criticize the Iranian fatwa by saying this is not a religious fatwa, it's a political one, and I don't agree with this. He has the right to express himself. This was my position. So don't reduce our criticism of a way of using freedom of speech as being completely against freedom of expression. So I think that this is something that we have to nurture everywhere. And to be critical with what is done in the name of Islam in many Muslim majority countries. That's the starting point of the discussion. So I'm not going to promote freedom of expression in the West and keep silent with the lack of freedom of expression in Muslim-majority countries, from the Gulf state to our allies here, because very often we speak about freedom of expression, but many are silent when they are dealing with dictators which are our allies. That's the reality. Gulf states are the allies of the West, so we don't speak about this, we don't care about what is happening to the people who are in jail, in political terms as well as in intellectual terms, because it also has to do with politics. Having said that now, I also think that in this I'm following Gandhi when he first got the Charter for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. He responded by saying, my mother told me that with every right you have, there is a duty. And I think that, yes, when we are in a pluralistic society, and you look at this room, people are coming from all over the world with different backgrounds, different religions. I think that you have the right to speak the way you want, but you also have some responsibility in the way you use your rights. And this is where I think that there are things that are legally possible, but ethically silly. Yes, you have the right to, for example, I got people who came to me in the Netherlands say, they are criticizing Islam, we are going to criticize the Jewish tradition and criticize the Holocaust by showing that you cannot touch this is sacred. I said, that's not the answer. Of course you can mock the suffering of the people. Do you think that this is ethical? I can do that, but it's silly. Am I going to do this? Am I going to criticize the religions or the suffering of the people? I think that there is an ethical way of dealing with your rights. It's legal, but it's silly to do it. So just be respectful, be respectful towards the sensitivity of the people, and this has to do with education. Civic education means know your rights, but know how to deal with your rights. You have the right to insult, but don't do it. You have the right to mock the people, but don't do it. Don't do this because it's not helping us to live together. So pluralism is not only about an accumulation of rights, it's also an understanding of our civic responsibility towards our fellow brothers and sisters in humanity and our fellow citizens. So when, for example, I was dealing with the people in Charlie Hebdo, I said, it's fine, you can do it, but do you think that this is sensible? Do you think that this is what this is going to help us to live together? So I would like people like you to be part of the discussion, not in a confrontational way, by saying this is my rights and I have the right to do it. Yes, you have the right, and I would prefer to have this open space where we respect each other, we listen to our sensitivity, and there is something which is called collective psychology. And I was in India. You know, there are not Muslims in majority there. And a Hindu was telling me, you know what, there is something which is coming from the West, which is not our sensitivity. We don't laugh at religions. We don't laugh at spirituality. And he was telling me from a religious background. I think that this is also part of our living together. We should listen to this. We should know our responsibility towards this. So I would say that the right civic culture in our societies, and I'm also saying this for Muslim majority countries, has to do with protecting the rights, the freedom of speech. And by the way, there is also something which you have to say, and we have to repeat this. There is nothing like absolute freedom of speech. Nothing in any society. There are things that you can't say, and racism is not acceptable. Insulting and slander, this is illegal. So we have to have a framework within which we are working. Within this, we don't need more law, we just need more education. So, you know what? Being obsessed with your rights could be sometimes very arrogant and nurturing ignorance of the other. I would prefer more education about the knowledge of the other. And I know something from my life. I traveled a lot. The more I know about the people, the more responsible I am with my right to speak. It doesn't mean that it's censorship. It's just sensitivity, respect, understanding. The more you travel, the more you are very cautious with, of course I can say it, but I know that it's going to hurt you And living together doesn't start with hurting the people. It starts with more education, more knowledge. Your rights are your rights, but the way you use them is also something which is essential. And I would tell you something, which is the great majority of the people agree with this. They agree with this quite naturally. They get a sense that, yes, you can say it, by why. Why are you going to hurt the people just for the sake of showing that you have this freedom of expression? So more education, more respect, and less obsession with my rights, and more understanding of our living together. This is the way I would put our responsibility towards freedom of speech. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I now would like to repeat the question: what are the rights and responsibilities of free speech? Meriem, you have 8 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're talking about the rights and responsibilities of free speech, there is no R or we. You don't represent all Muslims, and I don't represent all ex-Muslims and atheists. Obviously, there are differences of opinion amongst every group and community. And so, the reality of the matter is that this conflation between Islam as an idea that can be criticized, Islamism as a far-right political movement, which is the fascism of our era, in my opinion. It represents, whether it's the Muslim Brotherhood, whether it's the Iranian regime, whether it's ISIS, whether it's the Saudi regime. It's a far-right political movement that uses lovely, flowery words, often doublespeak, to defend the rights of the Islamists by pretending that they are defending the rights of all Muslims. There is no ROE. There is no ROE. There are many, many Muslims who are languishing in prisons and facing the death penalty for criticizing Islam, not even criticizing Islam. You have 27 Qurani Muslims in the Sudan. They believe that the Quran is holy. They question the hadith. They are now facing the death penalty. This is not just a question for ex-Muslims and atheists. There are many Muslims who face, the wrath of the Islamist movement. So I think one of the things that's often done is that these three are conflated together, and therefore, if you criticize Islam or you draw a cartoon, as Charlie Hebdo did, here's the cover of after the attack on Charlie Hebdo, which is actually a statement on fanaticism, not on Muhammad, Islam's prophet. So when you see something like that, it's not automatic that every Muslim is offended by Charlie Hebdo. There are, for example, journalists in Turkey who printed the Charlie Hebdo cartoon. There was a press, Iranian state-owned press, that printed the Charlie Hebdo cartoons and was shut down as a result. There were lawyers and journalists who tried to rally in defense of Charlie Hebdo in Iran and were stopped and beaten back by security agents. And there were cartoonists from across the Arab world who showed their solidarity with Charlie, and they were able to say, "Je suis Charlie." That doesn't mean that they're siding with every reactionary head of state that silences free speech, that censors free speech by pretending to side with Charlie, the Saudi government coming and siding with Charlie when it's murdering its free thinkers there. But what I'm saying is that there is no us and we. There are many Muslims who defend Charlie because in defending Charlie, they see that they are defending themselves. Because if Charlie cannot criticize Islam in the secular West, what chance do people have who are defending the right to speak in countries under Sharia law, in countries under blasphemy laws, in countries under apostasy laws? 14 countries punish apostates to death. 20 punish blasphemers to death. This is not, just to talk about racism. Racism is huge, and don't forget, it affects all of us, including ex-Muslims. Do you think the racists and fascists can distinguish between any of us? They can't even tell a Sikh from a Muslim. We're all the same to them. We're the other. We're the uncivilized, savage hordes trying to take over and Islamicize their white Christian Europe. We're all treated that way. I am often labeled an undercover jihadi merely for saying that you cannot equate all Muslims with Islamism. Many Muslims are free thinkers and secularists and have stood by me and defended my right to speak at risk to their lives. To say that this is, I'm bringing in the Muslim majority countries and we're talking about Europe. Look, you know very well the Muslim Brotherhood travels all over the world because it sees Islamism is a global movement. The violence is global. It affects people in Nigeria, in Mali, in Cameroon, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia. Mosques are blown up by the jihadis. Schools are blown up by the jihadis. And not only just the jihadis, Sharia law discriminates against women. There are many women, Muslim women, fighting against discriminatory family laws, against gender segregation, against compulsory veiling. You know that. That is the reality for many people. So to say that we can't bring these two together, or that saying that is emotional, I think misses the point. I think there are many in this country that benefit from pretending that Muslim equals Islamist. They don't. In my opinion, they don't. And I have many family members and friends and people who are struggling with me against Sharia law for Raif Badawi's freedom, as well as against gender segregation at universities here in Britain, who are also Muslim. There is no us and we. This is the problem with identity politics. You think to defend the rights of people, you have to defend Islam and Islamism. No. You have to defend political and social ideals for equality, for freedom of expression, and that includes defending the rights of Muslims and ex-Muslims.
I'm sorry, can I ask for just a
I'm sorry, if I can just finish, and then to say that, speaking of this reality, this violence, this indiscriminate violence against countless human beings for decades, there are mass graves in Iran of generations that have been slaughtered by this movement. There are generations slaughtered in Algeria, in many places. To say that these are emotional recountings of things is unfair. And to say that you're playing victim when you say this is also unfair. My point is that these are not victims. I am not a victim. I am someone who is a dissenter and who resists. And I think it is important to remember that this is not just about Charlie. This is about the resistance and dissent of many of us in Muslim majority countries and right here in Europe that are only merely asking for the right to speak. This is not about targeting a minority. We are also, many dissenters are minorities within minorities. And racism is not the only context. Fundamentalism is too. You cannot conjure away the jihadi violence and terror. You cannot conjure away Sharia laws and its effects on millions of people because you want to only focus on racism. Racism is important. We have to fight it. You cannot ignore it. But do not hide behind a defense of a minority, and in effect, what you're doing is defending Islamism. For me, I think free expression is key here. It's the only way that many of us are able to speak and to breathe and to challenge that which is oppressing us. And therefore, I think it should be free for everyone. It should be unlimited. I don't agree in any double standards. I think unless there is incitement to violence, and a lot of Islamists actually incite violence, unless there is incitement to violence, it should be free. It cannot be free unless it is free for everyone. But especially if it is free for Islamists, it should be free for the dissenters as well. Thank you very much.
Before we move to questions from the floor, Professor Ramadan, would you like to respond to that? And then, Meriem, you will have a chance to respond to you.
Yeah, I had a question, because there are lots of implicit things that are in your talk. You keep on repeating Muslims and Islamists. So you will just respond to this question. In all what I said now, you have the impression that I am an Islamist. This is what you are. implicitly repeating.
No, I believe that. I'm not implicitly repeating it.
So-
Sorry. Just to be very clear. Thank you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Like this, it's clear.
Yeah.
And now you have to prove it. In all what I said, I want you to be clear. And by the way, you know that you didn't respond to the question. The third question was missed.
Well, don't worry. I
I know. You will come.
they won't understand a word I said, so it's fine.
No, but the last question was very important.
Well,
it was the most important
I think
one.
free expression is important.
So,
and
can I ask you
unlimited.
something?
Yeah.
I want you, in a clear way, without implicit statement, to tell me where and when, in what I said tonight, there is something that you can call Islamist. By this, you have to define Islamist. Okay? I want this. The second thing, which for me, it's problematic in all what you are saying. I was not saying we and you, us and them. I was talking to you by saying from your position. And by the way, you will find me in your support in anything that you have to say here or in the Muslim majority country. I will defend your right to say what you have to say. That's the starting point of the discussion. But yes, there is a we and there is a them. How? Not by saying we Muslims versus the West. No. My position here tonight is to say lots of the people who are here who are not religious, some of them are Muslims, others are Christians or Jews, could come together and in the name of freedom of expression could say you are free to speak, but you have to be respectful of the others. This has nothing to do with Muslims versus the others. It is human rights and no double standard. So the last thing is, you said there is no double standard. Have you been against Charlie ابدو when they fired Cine because he said something about Sarkozy's son? Were you there? If not, why?
Okay. I think when we're talking about the question of free expression, when you say you will defend my right to say but you must be respectful, but there are responsibilities.
I didn't say that.
Allow her to finish.
I didn't say but.
But if we could allow her to finish.
But there needs to be responsibility in what is said. The but is a form of nicely restricting free expression. Saying that one who criticizes religion offends one's, the sensibilities of some doesn't take into account my sensibilities. I am offended when you go on TV and do not call for an end to stoning, but merely for a moratorium. I am offended.
That's so mean.
I am offended when you defend segregated swimming pools and you tell people that they should only shake hands if they have to with the opposite sex. It offends my sensibilities too, but that's fine. I can handle it. What I'm saying is that when we discuss free expression and we add buts to it, it is a way of censorship. It doesn't mean we don't respect each other as people. We must respect each other as people, irrespective of our beliefs. We must. We must. For me, I think while ideas are not sacred, human beings should be. But respecting people doesn't necessarily mean respecting ideas. We don't have to do that. You don't like my ideas, I may not like your ideas, that's fine. But if we start restricting what we can and cannot say with buts, we're not going to be able to give the possibility to speak freely, and we need to speak freely. We need to speak freely. Again, I don't subscribe to this whole idea of clash of civilizations, us versus them. I think that there are many Muslims, ex-Muslims, non-Muslims who are secularists, who are fighting the theocrats, the Islamists. The goal of the Islamists are to impose their project wherever they can, their theocratic project. Wherever they have the slightest amount of power, it is the end of free thought, the end of blasphemy, the end of apostasy, the end of women's rights. Therefore, what the only thing that most people have, that we all have in response to this movement, which is a fascist movement from the Muslim Brotherhood to ISIS to the Islamic Republic of Iran, is free expression. So please do not tell me, speak but respect my sensibilities. Speak but please don't offend me. Speak but don't be Islamophobic. Do not incite hatred, which is not, in my opinion, I'm challenging hatred, but that's what it's called in this day and age. When you say but, it's a restriction, and I think we should speak freely as long as no violence is being incited. But let's hope the Islamists can manage that.
Thank you. We'll now move to questions.
You forgot my first question about
Islam. I don't have
we will now move to questions from the floor,
things,
where I'm sure these issues will come up. So if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand high in the air, and someone will come round with a microphone which will amplify your voice. If we can please go to the second row here.
Hello.
So please also remember to address your questions to both speakers.
Yes, thank you very much. Oh, do you want me to stand up? I'll go on then. Well, thank you very much to both of you. It's been quite a heated debate, I think, so far. I know.
Heated?
I know.
It was a nice one.
My question is, does mainstream Islam in Europe, or in Britain, I don't mind which way you choose to answer it, need reform? And if so, in what ways and to what extent?
Do you mind if we start with Mariam, and then we'll come to you, Professor? So, 2 minutes.
Sorry, can I just put my timer on?
Yes,
Sorry.
of course.
No, okay, yeah. I don't think that religions, well, if they need reform, it's up to believers to decide what form of reform that is needed. I think, in a sense, Islam is going through a reformation. ISIS is Islam's reformation. And that actually what we need is an enlightenment against the Islamic Inquisition, as we did during Christianity's Inquisition. But I do want to also say this, that I think Islam is a lived experience, and that all people are much, much, much better than the tenets of their religious texts, whether it's the Quran, the Bible, or the Torah. And therefore, I think that, if people want to reform their religion, that's their prerogative. For me, the issue is to live in societies where religion is your right, but don't forget the right to religion has a corresponding right to be free from religion. And that freedom to be free from religion is impossible in theocracies. And I think, therefore, secular societies are better for all. Thank you.
Professor Ramadan.
So now when you do this, we have to stop.
Oh, no, that's 1 minute. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, you had 1 minute. Go ahead.
It doesn't matter, it's okay.
Go
I'll
ahead,
let you
go
speak.
ahead.
Go ahead, no, it's fine.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Can I take her minute? Look, just very quickly to react, because I didn't have time. You quoted me in a way 3 times. The 3 quotations are wrong, and that's not fair. So, because what you said, I never said it, and not in that way. For example, to say if a woman doesn't want to go to a swimming pool, she should have the right to go wherever she wants, is not the same as promoting segregation. That's not exactly the point. So don't twist my things and don't smile at this. Just be clear on the quotation. So on this, in what you are saying, I keep on repeating that Islam doesn't need reform, but Muslim minds need reform. They need to reassess the interpretation. And by the way, not only in the West, I don't know why we have to speak about the UK or do we speak about Europe. Throughout the world, we need to have a reassessment of the way we are reading the scriptural sources, in the way we are dealing with the world. And I say yes, there is no doubt that Muslims around the world are facing many crises. One of them is the way they are reading the scriptural sources. And this is an internal debate. For example, to say what I said before, the right for people to be critical towards Muslim values and Muslim practices, this should be something which is open. It's not in Muslim majority countries. And by the way, not only for the people who are criticizing Islam. I want to see, I'm not an Islamist, but there is something that I'm going to protect as long as I am alive. Is anyone is facing dictatorship and up in jail, I would expect from someone like you to say the dictators are not only Islamist dictatorship, but also the secular dictatorships. I want you to speak about Egypt the way you are talking about Iran.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree. You're right. Yeah.
Good.
We will now move to another question. So, can we please go to the member in the third row back here?
Thank you. Very confused in a lot of ways by what's been going on, because this whole thing about Islamism and Islam, you know, this kind of difference between these two things. I mean, for most of us who are witnessing all this going on, what Islamism is a kind of violent version of Islam. That's what it is. It's one that will go and kill a Charlie Hebdo, whereas another Islam person might say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to actually murder the people, you know. But there is not a difference in kind of the theology of it all. The theology of it all is the caliphate and the wanting that the whole world is going to be run by an Islamic creed and this theocracy. And I think that's what we're all afraid of, is that if it happens, if lots of kind of people from Islam come into our countries, we're going to suddenly find that we're being ruled by the kind of theocracy that...
Sorry, is there a question in there?
And that's the question. I mean, are you going to tell me that I'm actually going to be able to say that, you know, I don't wish to be ruled in this way, that I'm, you know, I feel that we're not free, and many of us are frightened even now to speak, to say something like I'm saying. A lot of people wouldn't even dare say that. They'd think, golly, somebody's going to throw a brick through my window if I start criticising or suggesting that I might be afraid of Islam.
Okay, thank you. Professor, would you like to respond to that? Thank you for your question.
Quite quickly about this question. The starting point of our discussion is for you, because I can understand that you have perceptions and understanding Islam and Islamism, and with such talks, it's clear that it's very confusing, because the starting point of what some are doing is to avoid defining the terms. So, okay, that's fine.
If we could let Professor Ramadan make his point. He's got 2 minutes. Thank you. Please continue.
So we start again the 2 minutes.
Well.
So, my point is to say when it comes to Islamism, we have to be very, you know, what we call political Islam is there are so many trends and so many different ways of looking at political involvement. So the starting point is not to confuse. You cannot put, as it was implicitly and quite explicitly done, the Muslim Brotherhood to Al-Qaeda and Daesh in the same box. That's simply wrong. In any first university class, somebody doing this should do again the first year.
Can we please let Professor Ramadan make his point? Excuse me. Can we please let Professor Ramadan make his point? Thank you.
You know, and exactly the same. What you are saying about Saudi Arabia is we have to be very critical about the Salafi interpretation. By the way, we are quite silent in Britain with Saudi Arabia because they have money, and their money makes us silence. So we deal with it. But we are at the highest... No. At the highest level of the state here, we are dealing with the kings there and targeting the followers here by saying you are wrong, but we take the money from there. So there is a lack of consistency in every policy that we have coming from the West. So this is the first answer. So we have to be very specific about this. Now, when you are talking about Daesh and violence, we have to be clear that anything which has to do with violence, but you also have to listen to the great majority of the Muslims around the world saying and repeating, Daesh and the Islamic State, or the so-called Islamic State, have nothing to do with the Islamic principles. And all the governments in the West, by the way, are telling you that the immense majority of the Muslims and the European Muslims are law-abiding. And by the way, just one thing, they are not coming to your country. Many of them are at home.
Merrim Namazi, you have 2 minutes to respond to the debate.
I think there are distinctions to be made. One is Islam, of course, is a religious belief. It's an idea like Christianity, like Judaism, like Hinduism. The religious right is a far-right political movement, like the Christian right that bombs abortion centers in the US, like the Hindu right that massacres Muslims in the Gujarat, like the Buddhist right in Sri Lanka or Myanmar, which is killing Muslims. Fundamentally, it's a political movement. While it has something to do with religion, it is first and foremost a political movement. And therefore, I think it's easy to make that distinction between Christianity and the Christian right. Not every Christian is burning down asylum centers with Pegida or burning crosses on people's lawns with the KKK. There is a huge distinction between ordinary believers and a far-right political movement. Yes, of course, there are distinctions between the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, and Islamic State, as there are distinctions with the Hindu right and within the Hindu right, the Christian right. Nonetheless, they are fundamentally the same form of movement. A little bit less fascist is still fascist, in my opinion. And finally, Muslims are people like all others. They have as many different opinions and voices as there are people. Many of those who are fleeing now from Syria, from very often Islamic states and dictatorships, are people who just want to be free. We shouldn't be afraid of them. They are just like any of us. They are voting with their very feet, despite the fact that the Islamic State has issued fatwas saying that to leave Syria and Iraq is a crime, an apostasy crime. They are voting with their very feet because they also dream of freedom and equality. And that's why these are not Western demands, they are universal ones. And for me, I think open borders is the key in a global age where flight is the reality for many. Look at those people as people who are coming to bring universal values. Many of them are, a vast majority are. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now look for another question. Could we please go to the member right at the back?
Hi, Mariam. I used to live in Dubai, and whilst there, I found myself accepting the fact that actually, when you went into
Can you keep your microphone to your mouth so we can hear you, please?
When you enter a shopping mall, I found myself accepting the fact that actually, girls were encouraged to cover up their bare shoulders. Does this make me an Islamist?
Sorry.
What I'm trying to ask is basically how your definition of Islamism seems to imply that any imposition of Islamic culture in any public place is fundamentally wrong. Why do you think this? And surely when it's something which is so slight as that can be tolerated.
Is this a question addressed just to Mariam?
To Mariam,
we
and then
both will answer, right?
Right, yeah, both speakers will answer, but in future, can you please address questions to both speakers? Thank you. So, Mariam, please, you have 2 minutes. Yes, it's in the back, yeah.
For me, I think obviously Islamism is a far-right political movement. I think there's confusion just because there is so much conflation between Muslims, Islam, and Islamism. And I think that is to the detriment of people, whatever their beliefs, within those who are considered Muslim heritage. Islamism to me is a political movement first and foremost, so it's not individuals practicing their religious beliefs, my parents fasting or going to mosque or what have you, what ordinary believers do. It's very different than a political movement that is trying to impose a caliphate, which is an Islamic state, that is trying to impose Sharia law, which, by the way, we often hear about jihadis and how, that is the violence that one needs to be concerned about. This is very much the British government line and other government lines as well. However, for me, that's not the only concern. Sharia law is a form of indiscriminate violence against the populations where it rules. We're not just talking about amputations for stealing or stoning. for adultery, but also discriminatory family laws, women's rights to divorce, to child custody, women's testimony being half that of a man. These are major battlegrounds for many women and men in Muslim-majority countries and also here in Europe. So that's the distinction. Islamism is a far-right political movement. If you can tell the difference between a Christian and a member of the EDL, then I think you should be able to tell the difference between a Muslim and an Islamist.
Professor Ramadan.
Yeah, once again, I think that the question was mainly about, again, something which is quite clear in what you are saying, is that there is a confusion in your definitions. We don't know who you are talking about. And once again, just to say Islamism is, there are two problems in what you are saying. Islamism is far-right parties, as if they are all like this, and the notion of Sharia is about discriminatory law, which I think, once again, it depends who you are talking about, how this is going to be interpreted, and once again, to reduce the concept to some implementations or some understanding, it's not fair. So I would like you to be much more sophisticated in the way you are dealing with the Islamic notions, and even with political Islam or Islamism, to the point that you can be much more consistent and much more efficient in your criticism if you don't put everything in the same box and say they are all the same. And because at the end, this is used also by some dictators who are doing exactly what you are doing. They are saying all our opponents are Islamists, they are radicals, so we have the right to oppress them. And I think that this is very dangerous. I would like you as well to be, as I said, and I repeat this, quite clear about the repression that some of the political activists are facing in secular dictatorships. And unfortunately, we don't hear you enough being critical towards the dictators. It's as if you have one target, is the religious dictatorships and not the others. Just be consistent. Be critical to all the dictators, and the secular dictatorships are as bad as any religious dictatorships. The last point that I wanted to make is, for example, we have to be quite clear about the violence and Daesh. Please don't confuse what Daesh and the Islamic State are doing with other Islamic trends in the Muslim majority countries, because that's not fair. I'm considered as an apostate my blood is lawful for Daesh. I'm quite happy with that. As much as I was happy not to be able to enter the United States of America under George W. Bush. It's an honor just to be perceived as an apostate and not to be, that's an honor. I'm serious about that. But at the point, it's not for us now to play the victims and to say, oh, we are rejected. We have to take a stand. We have to be consistent. We have to be clear to the definitions that we are using and the principles that we are defending. And unfortunately, even in what you are saying, there are double standards.
Thank you. We'll now look for another question. Could we please go to the member in the front there with the glasses? Yeah.
Yes, it's just a question in relation to definitions, because I understand from some of the other questions that are being asked here that there is some conflation and some confusion in relation to terms such as Islam and Islamism. Reform is another word, for example, that can be easily understood in a variety of different ways. To what extent do both speakers regard the importance of making philosophical and psychological dispositions as part of our analysis of the situation? Because psychological and philosophical dispositions are important, because I think as one of the speakers has mentioned very clearly that there are lots of things going on in Muslim majority countries which might have a psychological or a philosophical basis to them. So my question really is, when we're trying to define some of these very difficult terms, to what extent might that distinction between psychological and philosophical positions be useful in the analysis?
Professor Ramadan, 2 minutes.
Yes, that's a very, I'm not sure I understood the question, but what I understood is very good. I like your question. Because I think it's exactly
Because
what...
if I just clarify, I mean, psychological dispositions would be things such as moodiness, irritability. Moodiness and irritability. So we might look at individual actors in a particular Muslim country acting and reacting to a particular political event. But a philosophical disposition would be something which looks at things which are a bit more permanent, or things which may not change or change under specific conditions. Solubility, for example, fragility.
Professor Ramadan.
So I think I got that. I really think that in our discussion in Muslim majority countries, and by the way, even in the West, we have to stop Islamizing all the questions. It's as if everything is under the religious frame, and we understand the people, give me your religious identity, I know how I am going to define you. That's wrong. That's completely wrong. My identity is not only to be a Muslim, and I'm saying to Muslims living in the West, as well as Muslim majority countries, stop talking about Islam. Behave as Muslims, but just be citizens and human beings and deal with the cultural dimension, the psychological dimension. So what you said, when it comes to the Muslim majority countries, and once again, even here, we have to take into account many other factors. You spoke about the psychological factor. That's very important. I'm dealing with people who have much more psychological problems than religious concern. This is one. Second, when it comes to the legal framework, this obsession that Muslims have about is it halal and is it haram, that's a problem. Because at the end, the philosophy of law, this philosophy of the whole discussion is not there. We have to reconcile philosophy, psychology, but not only this. Socioeconomic problems. Socioeconomic problems. Many of the problems we are dealing with are socioeconomic problems and not religious problems. It has to do with unemployment. It has to do, for example, we keep on repeating, you know what? We have a problem with women in Muslim majority countries and in the West. Yes, there is a problem with women, but I would tell you that today in the Muslim majority countries, as well as the Muslim community, we have a problem with men. We have a problem with men, with the psychology of how is my place, where is my place in the whole thing, because it's changing so fast that there is a problem. So I think that we have to stop being obsessed with religion and start talking about so many other factors that are explaining what is happening in the world today.
Thank you, Professor Ramadan. Namazi, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think there are many different factors that feed into this question, but I think I'd like to go back to the fact that it is a political issue first and foremost. When you talk about this obsession with religion as the only marker that identifies people, this is partly because of a religious right wing that insists and continues to label entire groups and communities of people as Muslim and only as Muslim. And of course, the Iraqization of the world, the separation of entire societies based on ethnicity and religion and culture hasn't helped. We see that in Europe too with regards to multiculturalism and the fact that groups and communities are divided into one religious identity, a homogenized identity, where making dissent impossible. If there is confusion, I think it's the Islamists who are aiding the confusion because they refuse to give a distinction between Muslims, Islam, and Islamism. And that's why these three are often conflated with each other. A criticism of Islam and Islamism is seen to be an attack on Muslims. It benefits the Islamists. I'm also against US militarism, I'm a communist, I'm against capitalism, but this talk is about Charlie Hebdo and Islamism. So whataboutery, why didn't I mention this and that, really doesn't help. I want to also say that the reality of the matter is that while these religious right movements are different, you have the Hindu right in India getting very angry when they're compared with Islamism as another religious right-wing movement. My argument is that there are many differences, but fundamentally these are movements that are very similar to fascist movements.
Thank you. We have time for one final question. Excuse me, we will have one final question. Please keep this question short. We will go to the member in the red on the front here.
This question is probably aimed at Tarek, but I actually think both speakers can answer it. I completely agree with your distinction that when we're talking about reform, you're talking about reforming Muslim interpretations rather than Islam. I completely agree with that. What I do want to ask, and it's probably the same for all monotheisms, all religions of the book, all Abrahamic religions, is it the case that, and I'm not sure about this, but is it the case that there is something within Islam, and I can qualify this, or within religions, that prevents or hinders reform?
So, Meriem, you will answer this question first in the order, so you have 2 minutes to answer this question.
So I'm the last one.
You
That's
are the
good.
last one, that is right.
I'm lucky.
It's following the order.
Of course, you're going to have the last word, but still not the best word. On the issue of reform, I think, look, in my opinion, we're living under an Islamic Inquisition like the Christian Inquisition. And I think when you're living in such a situation, reform is impossible because a lot of Muslim free thinkers and reformers, Muslim reformers, I'm not vested in this because I'm an atheist, but Muslim reformers are facing death threats, are facing imprisonment, and the death penalty, including, or death threats here in Europe as well. People like Osama Hassan, for example, that want to reform, that want to challenge the status quo. So I think when you are faced with a religious right-wing movement that has power, and that says that this is the interpretation, and that's the only interpretation that's going to matter, and that everyone has to abide by those interpretations, it makes reform very difficult. And that's why I think, in fact, challenging Islamism politically opens the way, and also by ways of blasphemy and apostasy. Whilst a lot of people may not like it, may feel uncomfortable with it, it is a way of challenging this movement and opening up the space so that actually the reform and dissent that's very needed can take place. So I think for any sort of challenging of religion, which is dogma, which is deemed sacred, which is untouchable, there needs to be criticism in order to do that. And to criticize, we need unconditional free expression. And that's something that unfortunately we're denied very often in Europe as well as across the world. And not just ex-Muslims, but many, many Muslims, minority religions, and agnostics, unbelievers, and everyone else. And that's why I think defending free expression is a defense not just of ex-Muslims and minorities within minorities, but of Muslims as well. And it's hugely important. Thank you.
Professor Ramadan, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, just to react on what you were saying right now. Again, you keep on repeating always the same thing about Islamism and about this, it's not helping. And then there is, I'm sorry to say, a kind of an obsession in the way you are dealing with the issue. For example, when we say we have to stop being obsessed with, why do you call yourself an ex-Muslim? Why don't you tell us who you are now, not who you were before? What is the meaning of being an ex-Muslim? I don't care about who you were before. Just let us talk about who you... So this obsession that I have, why? You know why? Because in the atmosphere, you are also playing a very important political role in the West now by being an ex-Muslim, being able to say something about Islam because you were a Muslim. Sorry? I asked the question.
Can you please let speaker
I have 2 minutes, so I'm sharing my time. That's okay?
Respect his time. Thank you very much. No more interruptions on that regard. Thank you.
So this is the problem, and this is my reaction to this. As to your question, I hope you're happy. So, yes, there are within all the religions, all the monotheistic religion, there are people from within, or powers from within. We have to understand this, that within religions there are spaces where power is at stake. Who is interpreting? And some they don't like the reformist approach. And I think that this is exactly an internal struggle. I'm coming from the reformist tradition. I call for a radical reform from within, and I'm calling for a shift to the center of gravity of authority in Islam. But this has to be done from within with quite a credibility and a credential from within. It's not by putting all the Muslims together, and this is why I'm not talking about reforming Islam. I want to reform the Muslim minds, their interpretation, and also to challenge the scholars. For example, by saying to the Muslim scholars, who I call the scholars of the text. You are not the only reference to authority in Islam. You have to deal with other scholars and scholars that are dealing with the world. So bringing together this discussion, it's important. Yes, you are facing resistance, but at the end, a reform process is always like this. My point is, do it from within, step by step, challenging the questions and being able to bring to the table not only Muslims, by the way, because my last point is this one. In any religious reference, the reform is not only coming from within, it's not Muslims for Islam, it's all of us here by the questions, and this is why I'm saying this, even in the West, people of other faiths, through the questions they are putting to Muslims, are helping the Muslims to come to a new answer. So this is a process which is very important. I'm not expecting only Muslims to go for reform. It's in this two-way process that you can do it, and we need to do it.
I am afraid that is all we have time for. Thank you very much to everyone who asked a question this evening, and most of all, thank you to our guest speakers. Please can I ask everyone to remain seated as we leave the chamber, and once again, thank Professor Tariq Ramadan and Meriem Namazi.